topic for today is attachment theory and finding the root issues of substance use disorder for lasting treatment. So, when we see a lot of our clients that are in substance use issues, we find that their attachment problems become very much important. They raise to the surface. So, why is attachment theory so important? Well, with this approach, in the last decades, we have seen a substantial growth of studies that have been done in attachment with substance use disorder. And despite some of the problems that generated, the general link between insecure attachment and substance use is well established. So it's very, very important to us today. As well, based on attachment theory, substance use can be understood as a form of self medication. It's an attempt to compensate for lacking attachment strategies. So if we can understand and help our clients embrace this concept, I think it'll help them improve in a lot of ways. So we have had clients that come in, and you may have some as well, where they come in with a substance use problem, they come in with what they present, but you realize that there's something way deeper than just what they're presenting with. And many times the missing link that we have to discover is their background and their history and their attachment relationships. And that's why so many times we say you have to change your people, places, and things. So we want to help them understand their personal issues and their relationships, and especially in their primary relationships, because this can create quite a bit of trouble for them today. We're all compensating for something. My dear friend, Dr. Paige Huff, who passed away, I think 2 years ago, would say that almost every time we would get together, and he mentored me in so many wonderful ways. And he would just constantly say, Paul, we're all compensating for something. We're all trying to kind of balance the scales, We're trying to get to something that helps us build from a lack in our past or a lack in our life. And that compensation that we do can show up in many different ways. Also, we find that attachment theory, it suggests a developmental link, a developmental pathway. And so when there are breaches and when there are these lagoons and gaps in development from childhood development on, then we find that there's a negative and adverse effect from that. As human beings, we tend to form bonds throughout our lives. And so these bonds begin with the bonds that are formed with our caregivers in the beginning and from infancy on. So these early bonds help us to shape that which would become later our sense of understanding and belonging. It causes us to understand how we attach and connect with people in our adulthood. And then also it develops neurological links in our brain so that we can understand better those gaps that people might have. So it's very, very important when we talk about bonding. Attachment theory is also a psychosocial explanation for human bonding. So when we think of attachment theory, we're all born with a biological system for attachment. Now, this takes us back to the argument that is always often proposed. Is it about nurture or is it about nature? Are we naturally born with an attachment system that is unique to us, and although it can be categorized by observation? Or is it a nurturing situation where we have attachment bonds that are formed by the way that we are brought up from infancy? To be very honest with you, I believe it's both. I believe that we all have an innate attachment system within us. And I think some people have a predominance of that. We'll look at it later. And I also believe that that is either developed or exacerbated by the way that we're brought up from infancy. And so we see the bonding that happens. We will seek to maintain proximity to other people. It can make us vulnerable to situations, even from infancy growing up. And as well, attachment styles they will form and inform many social relationships. The way we relate to people romantically, the way we relate to our families. You'll find a client that just can't seem to get along with anyone in his family. Or you have a client that he or she may feel like that they are the black sheep or a castaway or they're outcast from their family. And so in long-term relationships, and even the way people interact with strangers, attachment theory can quite often explain a lot of that, as we will see. So let's just camp out for a moment. This is a development that I've come up with on my own You have a copy of this. So I sent a copy through our good friends at eCare of several of these charts that we're going to use. Now, I like to give you charts and things that you can use tomorrow in counseling. So this is the complex form of this chart. On the next page, you'll see the very simple form of the chart that you can fill out with your clients. So let's say that a client comes in and they have substance use issues. We see that here where it says substance use bonding. But what we have to realize is that they may have a history of neglect. They may have had painful relationships in the past. There may have been a lack of bonding. So we want to help them trace backwards and find out where the original situation or the original relationship that you might say broke with them, what was the source of origin for many of the emotions that they have now? So it may have been in childhood. It may have been a first breakup with a boyfriend or girlfriend. But quite often we've discovered that people with SUD have had childhood trauma. They've had issues that came up in their childhood that there was a lack or an abuse situation happened. So there's a painful event, as you see here, the second red ball. So the first red ball we're going to consider to be our source, a neglect and painful relationship, a lack of bonding. But then we go to this other, so let's say that person that grew up with a lack of bonding later has another relationship. And it also turns out to be a painful relationship. It also turns out to be neglect, and there's neglect involved. And so they, once again, develop and learn certain things, mostly we call them cognitive distortions, throughout that relationship. Now, it might be in their teen years. It might be in their early development as a young adult. And so what begins to happen is it moves them to the next red ball, a sense of substance soothing. So they find that relationships cause pain. They find that relationships are difficult, and they find that relationships do not bring the kind of expectations that they had hoped for. There's pain, there's struggle, there's pushback. These problems are created. And through neglect and pain, they now find that a substance soothes that. There's a sense of self-comfort. There's a sense of calming that happens when they use a certain substance. So they go from not only substance soothing, but then they self-medicate. So the client that we see, the participant that comes to us with a presenting problem, might be a relationship issue, something severe that's going on. What we might find is that they learn to self-medicate and self-soothe somewhere back in their history. And we're going to help them discover that. We want to help them retrace their steps so that they can find it. Because when the substance use bonding happens, which is our last red ball here, that's when they're addicted. But if we only deal with the current addiction, as we quite often say, the substance use is simply a symptom. This is a presenting symptom. It is not the source or root problem. The source and root problem is the pain and neglect and the lack of bonding that occurred from their very primary original relationships. So when we get now to the substance use bonding that happens, you'll find that the person who presents themselves is tightly bonded with other substance users. Why are they tightly bonded to other substance users? Because that's where they get their comfort and soothing. And this can be a compensation for what they did not receive in their childhood, for what they did not have previously. And yet they find that when they use substances to soothe, which they work that way, when they use substances to medicate their pain, and they relate to other people and bond with those who are doing the same thing, now you have the worst case scenario. And that's why it's so hard for many of our clients, many of our participants, it's so hard for them to break away and get free from substance uses.